Hello and welcome to episode 3 of The Ben Stanley Show. In this episode, I'm going to do a quick book review of The Way of the Superior Man, a spiritual guide to mastering the challenges of women, work, and sexual desire by David Deida. I'll start by giving a quick summary of the book and just kind of my general reactions to it, what I thought about it. I'll dive into some of those in more detail. Then I'll just kind of talk a little bit about the points that they bring up, talk a little bit about just my views on masculinity and femininity, and hopefully leave you guys with some interesting questions to answer, and hopefully have a good discussion in the comment section afterwards. Okay, so my overall reaction to this book is that I didn't love it. I think that there's lots of good stuff in here, plenty of nuggets that I really enjoyed, but on the whole, it didn't really land for me. I think part of the reason for that is I've never really been a, true, unambiguous man's man. And although I'm quite comfortable with my masculinity, I don't really identify fully with that. I feel like I have lots of masculine and feminine within myself, and I really try to incorporate both of those and integrate both of those into my life. And I feel like this book is not the best for someone with that kind of orientation or that goal. It really is a book geared towards men and masculinity specifically. Another thing that I didn't particularly love about the book is it felt pretty misogynistic to me, and if not necessarily unfair to women, at least unfair to femininity. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail. But I also think that it felt kind of pseudoscientific in parts. I feel like there were moments I remember of him bringing up statistics that felt like they were pulled out of the hat, and there wasn't any, backing up of, what do you mean 90%? Where does that come from? How did you settle on that number? Or is it just a way of you saying like the majority of, based on, opinion or anecdote or personal experience? So yeah, let's dive into it. The first thing that I want to talk about here are the things that I liked. I think there was a lot in this book about challenging yourself to be better, to be the best version of yourself, to find your calling, to find your purpose in life. I think that whole idea is kind of fraught in and of itself, and I don't think that we should accept it as a goal uncritically, but of course there's lots of good in there, a lot that can be said for trying to just be the best version of yourself. I really, really like that focus on purpose, and I also really, really like the emphasis that was placed in this book on learning how to be strong with yourself regardless of how other people show up in your life. And, with this being a book on masculinity, the subtitle talked about what challenges of women, work, and sexual desire, right? So when women, like if I'm talking to a man, a heterosexual man, if women invalidate you in sexual relationships, or if you get pushback in work or at church or any other community thing, right? Like the value in being able to stand firmly on your own 2 feet and deal with that invalidation, allow people to disapprove of who you are, let that wash over you, and still be able to show up in integrity, even if not everybody agrees with you. I think that's really potentially valuable. It doesn't mean I think you should be an asshole and never listen to anybody and not value other opinions or perspectives, right? But in and of itself, there's a lot of value of that groundedness. Another thing that I really liked in this book was talking about sexual connection as being more than just like reaching an orgasm, right? Having sex be something that can be transcendent and connecting and have kind of a spiritual dimension to it rather than simply something that you do to get off. Because if you have a very basic approach to sex like that, it can be very easy to use people or to chase after sex for validation or even a type of self-medication to help yourself feel okay, but not really be doing it for the best reasons. So those are some of the things that I really liked about the book. Okay, now on to some of the things that I didn't like so much. I think chief among those is what I felt was the misogyny inherent in this book and the treatment of women and the treatment of the feminine more generally. I feel like there was a lot of characterization of the feminine in very negative or weak terms. And I feel like Deida presented it in a way where he tried to make it seem as if it was non-judgmental, but it kind of felt the way a backhanded compliment feels, right? He said things along the lines of, women are, it's not necessarily that they're being dishonest when they lie or when they say something different from what they said just earlier that day. It's that they really are just feeling different, and the way that they feel is more important than a more masculine idea of, the truth is constant and unchanging, which, sure, okay, probably there's some value in seeing things that way, but it's hard not to look at that and say, he's just treating women as incapable of telling the truth, or I should say treating the feminine as incapable of holding truth as a value, which I think is really unfair to the feminine. Also, I think that even in the positive traits that he ascribed to femininity, it felt misogynistic in the sense that he presented them in a way that felt catered towards masculinity or to the male gaze, right? That the thing that's valuable in the feminine is that men appreciate it. It's the beauty, it's the vibrance, it's the chaos, it's the challenging you, so you bring forward your best self rather than just settle into complacency if you want to stay alone or whatever. And again, sure, there's value in seeing the world this way. However, I think it is very objectifying towards the feminine, which, you can very easily map onto women as a whole here. And I think that's really unhelpful because it treats, I think, women and femininity in a way that can't really stand on its own, which, frankly, is a criticism of the way he treats both the masculine and the feminine in this book, because I think he presents, he talks a lot about polarity and the differences between the masculine and the feminine that create, magic and chemistry and attraction and whatever else. And again, lots of value in seeing the world this way. I have talked to a lot of people who have felt strongly that this polarity is the pathway to some really, really great experiences, sexual and otherwise. And I've even experienced some of that myself, right? And yeah, there's a lot of value there. But I think fundamentally the way that he presents the masculine and the feminine and their relationship to one another feels very needy to me. Like the masculine needs the feminine to challenge it and to experience beauty, to experience this aliveness and this chaos and this nature and this changing, right? And the feminine, for its part, needs the masculine in order to be grounded, in order to have truth, in order to have security, in order to have that rock that's unchanging, that consistency, right? And I think that presenting it in this way, if you buy into the idea that the ideal relationship has somebody who is very masculine and somebody who is very feminine, and they embody these traits, it creates almost a necessary codependency, I think, that arises from that, where neither of these people is okay or whole on their own, but they really need each other to feel whole or complete or okay or validated or whatever you might want to call it. So along these same lines, I think it's really valuable to, as we consider parts of ourselves that, our society or we would classify as masculine or feminine, it's important that we cultivate multiple aspects of the self. I should be able to experience and value the beauty of life and nature and whatever without needing to depend on a woman, a partner, to bring that out in me. I should be able to bring that out in myself, right? And also on the masculine side, I shouldn't need a masculine presence in my life external to myself that I need to depend upon, or that, if we want to flip the role, if I'm talking about my partner, that she would need this from me to be really grounded, someone who can, be financially safe or physically safe or whatever else, so that she doesn't have to worry about that. I think that we are better off when we take full responsibility for developing wholeness and completeness in ourselves. And it's not to say that we can't have preferences about that. I still really appreciate feminine beauty. I want that in my life. Now, I think I can better approach my desire for feminine beauty if I am grounded enough in myself that I don't need it in my life. It's better to desire it and want it rather than need it, because I'm trying to fill a hole in myself that I can't take care of on my own. I need to be responsible for my own emotions, for my own development. And from that place, I can go out from a position of true desire, of adding beauty and wonder and meaning and purpose to my life, rather than need fulfillment of, I need somebody external to me to complete the parts of me that I lack, if that makes sense. So this is another part that I feel like he tried to address this somewhat, not so much as what I'm trying to do, where it's prescriptive of, I think people should be responsible for masculine and feminine within themselves, but he talked about the possibility of, people who have a balanced sexual essence, I think is what he called it, where they have, roughly equal parts of masculine and feminine within themselves. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about that and make room for that, because he said that people who, well, first of all, let me back up. He just talks about this from the sense of, this isn't necessarily gender essentialist, right? You can have women who are more masculine, just as you can have men who are more feminine. And the important thing is not to find the, right gender that you're looking for. So he didn't really address sexual orientation too much, other than to, admit that this can apply to gay couples too, for example, but that you should be looking for someone that matches up with your polarity. So if you have a masculine sexual essence, you should be seeking for a partner who has a feminine sexual essence, and vice versa. And if you have a balanced sexual essence, you should be looking for a partner with a balanced sexual essence as well. And it was interesting to hear him talk about that, because he barely spent any time on it. Most of the book was about the masculine sexual essence. If you are a masculine person, this is how you develop your masculinity to become a superior man or a superior masculine person if you happen to be a woman with a more masculine essence in his framing. But he did briefly touch on this and said that those who have a more balanced sexual essence between their masculine and feminine, they tend to be more mature and grounded and not as volatile, and their relationships seem to be much more stable, which, as someone who identifies as having a more balanced sexual essence, as he frames it, I really like that, because I'm like, yeah, I would love to believe that that's exactly who I am, more mature and more balanced and capable of this, that, and the other. But then he said something that didn't sound so great, which was, if you have a balanced sexual essence, you are unlikely to be able to develop the levels of polarity to reach passion. You can have a calm and kind of drama-free life, but you're not going to experience those heights of passion that come from this extreme polarity. And I don't want to believe that's true, as somebody who, again, if his framing is useful to the extent to which it is useful, I think that that's what I fit. I don't want to consign myself to a life lacking in passion. And more importantly, I feel like I am a very passionate person, sexually and otherwise. And so I feel like, again, this is just anecdotal, not that this is a very scientific book to begin with, right? But I at least have a data point of myself that I can point to and say, I don't feel like I am strongly masculine or feminine at the expense of the other, and yet I feel like a very passionate person. And I feel that I've been able to express and experience that passion in relationships, including sexual relationships, in ways that is very gratifying and fulfilling. And I don't feel like I'm missing out by lack of polarity having to do with my essential sexuality, basically. Anyway, there's a lot more that I could say about that, and I would love in the future to dive more into exploring my personal experiences with that within relationships, both within my marriage and my current relationship that I've been in for over 2 years now at this point, because I feel like there's a lot that's relevant there and instructive to these questions of sexuality, masculinity, femininity. But I want to be very careful and cautious there because I'm a very open person and I'm very happy to talk about my experience and share that with people. But I do want to be careful and respectful and conscientious about sharing from the lives of other people that maybe are not as open to that as I am. And I feel like I 100% have the right to talk about my experience within any sort of relationship or partnership. I don't feel like I need permission to do that, but I do want to be careful and conscientious about it. So I'll probably do that at some point, but I just want to take some more time to think about how I want to do that because, yeah, it can be touchy. Anyway, those are the big points that really stood out to me from the book. On the whole, like I said, plenty to like in here, plenty of value that I took from it, plenty of ways I felt I could take lessons from the book and apply those in my own life and in my own relationship to my benefit and the benefit of my relationship. But I don't know. I just feel like it largely missed the mark or presented things in a way that were maybe potentially dangerous to the ways that we think about masculinity and femininity. Talking about masculinity and femininity more broadly in my life, the earliest I can remember paying really close attention to this was when I took a psychology class in high school and we took a quiz on, how masculine or feminine are you? And I think I remember scoring pretty close to in the middle, slightly on the feminine side. And for whatever reason, this didn't bother me. I feel like it could be a very common experience for a man growing up in United States culture, in Mormon culture in Utah that I grew up in, that could feel, I could imagine feeling a lot of insecurity at, oh my gosh, am I manly enough? Am I true to my nature or my essence enough if I'm a little bit feminine? For whatever reason, I don't really know, but I didn't feel that. And I've always been quite comfortable with my femininity. I really like that about myself. And, growing up, I always tended to have more female friends than I had male friends. I just got along with girls better, and that continued into adulthood. It was quite difficult when I got married and then subsequently became divorced because for a married man in my culture to have other female friends was kind of inappropriate. And even as a recently divorced guy, to be spending time with female friends, I don't know, that felt awkward and hard. I think part of that was because I was living in Provo, Utah at the time, which is not the official headquarters of the Mormon church, but basically the cultural epicenter of the church. And yeah, it was really hard to be experiencing that. But yeah, it's been interesting to see the evolution that I feel I've gone through over my life around this, because yeah, I and again, I don't want to get into too much detail about my marriage specifically just yet, but I feel like a lot of the stereotypes about, men just want to, like, they become workaholics, or they're just interested only in sex or whatever, and women want those relationships. They want that connection. They want that intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't mean as a euphemism for sex. I mean as a real closeness where you really see and are seen by another person, right? That's been more stereotypically feminine. And in my marriage, I feel like I was very much operating in that space of I wanted more emotional connection and intimacy and was lacking in that. Funny story, when I got married, because I had so many more female friends, I actually decided to have groomsmaids at my wedding, and I gave them all little bow ties that had our wedding colors in it, right? And I remember having a great time just taking a bunch of photos with the wedding party, and I loved how all of my friends did interesting things with their bow ties. Some of them, just did it around their neck like you're supposed to. Supposedly, some did it as a bow in their hair, or like maybe one or two did it on their wrist or arm, and I don't know. It was a good time. But one of the consequences of this in my life is that I feel like I've had a hard time fitting in to traditionally male spaces, right? I have always had, a fair number of decent male friends. It's not like I'm incapable of doing that, but when I am faced with the prospect of getting together with the guys, going to do activities with just men and not doing things co-ed, not having women present, just didn't really appeal to me a lot, and I felt like I had a hard time fitting in any groups that were just specifically male spaces. And it's been interesting because that is something that has changed and evolved over the past few years for me. I found a couple of men's groups where I felt like I really did fit in and belong for the first time. And it's been really valuable and helpful for me to find a group of guys that are welcoming and accepting to me as I am, even though I'm not your, traditional man's man and, let's go shooting and hunting and fishing and whatever else away from the women. And yeah, it's been really cool to belong to those spaces and start to feel connected with more masculine energy, frankly. And it's interesting because I have been talking with some friends about this topic in preparation for doing this video. And one of the things that I did was, with a group of friends, took another one of those quizzes of, how masculine or feminine are you? I'll make sure to provide a link to this in the comments so you can go there if you're curious, and, feel free to share results in the comments, and maybe some commentary, like, are you surprised or unsurprised at what your result was to that? But anyway, we took those, and I was surprised to find that I'm still pretty strongly both. I have a fair amount of feminine and masculine traits, and yet now I skew slightly masculine, which is different from what I did in high school. And I'm not really entirely sure why that is or what that is. I don't necessarily want to read into it too much, but it was just interesting to see. So there are some of my thoughts on David Deida's The Way of the Superior Man and on masculinity and femininity generally. This is a topic that I would like to explore more, I think. Maybe not necessarily attached to a book review. So if this is interesting to you, let me know if you want to hear more, and let me know if you have specific questions that maybe I didn't address or that you wish maybe I explored in more depth. And yeah, I'd be happy to circle back around and, do another video at some point. I had some questions that I thought of that I'd be curious to, see some responses to in the comment section, or just for your edification if you want to just do that on your own. I'm curious what you guys think of how much of what we consider masculine or feminine is like essential, like there's something real there, something fundamental to being human, versus how much of that is just kind of like socially or culturally constructed and highly contingent rather than fundamental. And I know that there's been some really interesting cultural movements over the last little while associated with kind of the LGBT queer community around, you know, not just looking at sexual orientation, but just gender identity, accounting for trans experience, as well as people who feel like the labels that we have don't necessarily fit them. So people that might consider themselves gender fluid or non-binary or something like that. I'm curious with those movements, which seem to be, you know, social and cultural things that we're experiencing, is gender becoming less relevant because of that? Another thing that I am curious your thoughts about, what do we think about toxic masculinity? I've had some comments about this, and one of my soapboxes is that I like to tell people who are on the, you know, maybe feminist side of this, and I consider myself a feminist, but I see some feminists conflating toxic masculinity with masculinity generally, right? And like, if you are male, you are toxic, which I think is wrong and unhelpful. And then on the side of men who are pushing against some of these ideas, I see language that seems to me to be dismissive of toxic masculinity. And so I find that I try to push back against them as well and say, like, no, there can be and there is toxic masculinity. That does not mean that masculinity itself is toxic, right? So trying to explore some of the nuance with that on both sides and avoid these simplistic takes that are unfair either to feminists or to men generally. I'd be curious to hear thoughts on that. And as an extension to that, I'm curious if anybody has thoughts on what toxic femininity is and what that looks like, because I strongly believe that men do not have a monopoly on toxicity, and I think there are plenty of immature and unhealthy and cruel and unkind behaviors that women and the feminine can engage in as well. So that would be an interesting discussion. Lastly, I just want to say that I think there's a lot to be loved and appreciated and grateful for in both masculine and feminine spheres. I'm not against masculinity or femininity, nor am I particularly for one or the other. I don't think that this needs to be a competition. And I think that although there is plenty of value to be had in identity politics, I think that there are limitations and liabilities to it as well. And if we, you know, wrap our identity so much up in this and make it an us versus them, that's never going to have a good resolution. If you value your masculinity or femininity, I would encourage you to do so in ways that is not exclusive to or dismissive of the value of maybe what you don't identify with so much. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful. If anybody else has checked out the book, please let me know what you think about it in the comments. And let me know if you have suggestions of other books that you'd like me to take a look at and share my thoughts on. Thank you again for spending this time with me. I appreciate your support, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a meaningful day.